Last week we spoke about the lives of Adam and Eve and what went wrong. And we spoke about Abram and how he lived as an example of a believing man. And then Moses as an example of a believing leader. And then we spoke about the principles of faith, and because they're extremely important, about what are the real things that are important, and came to the conclusion that what is really important are the things that Paul deals with all the time and that he actually takes to Jerusalem, because those are the things that the believers from the nations are to do, which are not to get involved with idolatry, not to get involved with sexual immorality, not to eat what has been strangled, and not to participate of blood, which actually means what they were saying is that believers from the nations have to find out what idolatry is, and that they can find that out from Jewish believers, because only the Jewish believers had access to the scriptures at that stage, because the only available scriptures at the time of the book of Acts was the Old Testament. And then we spoke about the way that the fire falls repetitively, and then about how important it is to enter the rest. And today, when we hear this voice, and this hour when we hear this voice, this minute when we hear this voice, this second when we hear this voice, not to harden our hearts and to disobey and to ignore it, but to do what the Lord has actually called us to do. So tonight we're going to speak about Yeshua's exposition of the 10 words or the 10 commandments. Yeshua says, "How blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs." And when one interrogates the scriptures, and you interrogate the ancient Greek in which the scriptures were written, how blessed are the poor in spirit. Poor in spirit actually boils down to a word that means bankrupt. So it means blessed are those who know how bankrupt they are to themselves. In other words, how little they are worth. And then they say, because those who know how little they are worth, in other words, those who are humble, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Now, the kingdom of heaven is eternity, and the kingdom of heaven is where the Lord himself is, where Yudhe is. So it means that those people will have Yudhe in their lives. And therefore the kingdom of heaven is theirs. God is theirs. God lives in them. And this is parallel to the first commandment in this, that it says everything about I am, because the Spirit, God is the Spirit. God is Spirit. He has no shape or form. And this is parallel to Exodus 20, verse 2. I am Yudhe your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. So the commandment isn't really a commandment, because it says who God is. But Yeshua turns it into a commandment when he says that it is important to be humble, because only the humble will truly know who God is, because God will only inhabit those who are humble. And this is an amazingly important statement. And then the second thing that goes along with this, he says, how blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. If one stands back a step and you say, okay, what does this mean? Because this cannot be only to mourn for those who have died, but actually to say that this is about mourning in the sense that mourning is the result of sin, because all sin causes mourning. All the results of sin are death, disease, having too little to eat, not having what is necessary to put on, not having a roof over your head. Those are all the results of the fall in sin, because man was taken care of completely in the Garden of Eden. Mourning is because we are in a slavery to our sin, and that actually is what our Egypt is. We are mourning because we are in Egypt, and that is where our sin takes us. This completes into the same statement, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. So when Yeshua says these two things, how blessed are the poor in spirit, how blessed are the humble, and how blessed are those who mourn, he actually is speaking about those who acknowledge their sin, who accept responsibility for their sin, and then mourn because of it, because they realize that there is no way that they can take themselves out of their sin. Because we cannot do that. Only God can take us out of that. How blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. It is said that the two meekest people who ever lived are Moses and Yeshua. And they have one thing in common. They were not pushovers, so they were not meek in the sense that we generally think, that they just let people walk over them, because Moses would never have brought Israel out of Egypt if he had allowed the Jews to walk over him. Also, the same applies to Yeshua. If he just allowed the Pharisees and the Jews to do what they wanted to and never addressed them, then he would never have been able to die for their sin. So he was meek, but their meekness is found in this, that they never defended themselves. They never defended their persons. They only defended God, and God defended them through the Torah. And we know how he defended Moses. He defended Moses when Aaron and Miriam tried to take co-leadership with him. He defended Moses when Korach tried to take over from him, and the 250 people with their censers of fire. It means that a person who is meek is someone who allows God alone to defend him. Now, if you are taken out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery, you have to go into the land. And this is implied in the statement, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery, because he brought them into Israel. And that means that he will bring us into his eternity, where there is no sin anymore, and where we can live in his presence constantly. Then he says, as a result of this, he says, how blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled. To hunger and thirst after righteousness is to hunger and thirst after God himself, and they will be filled. But people who hunger and thirst for righteousness cannot serve any other God. So they will have no other God before them. And that is the equivalent of, you are to have no other gods before me. And then he balances this, because then immediately after he said how important it is to him that we have to be righteous, he then starts speaking about what will the righteous be like, so that they can reach those who are not righteous. And then he says, how blessed are those who show mercy, for they will be shown mercy. The word that is used for mercy here is actually compassion. How blessed are those who show compassion, for they will be shown compassion. So when we have unending love for other people, God will show his unending love to us. And obviously, when we extend this to other people, we're actually demonstrating to them that there is no other God than God himself. And this is what we are to do. It goes into this, you are to have no other gods before me. Then he says, now parallel with this, you are to have no other gods. He's going to say something that we need to do so that we can get people to move away from their carved images. And what is he then says? He says, how blessed are the poor in heart, for they will see God. The pure in heart, because they are humble, and they mourn for their sin, and they don't defend themselves, they are meek, and because they hunger and thirst after righteousness and do not serve other gods, cannot possibly make carved images, because how can you make a carved image if you are truly serving God? So the parallel here is you're not to make yourself a carved image or any kind of representation of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water below the shoreline. You're not to bow down to them or serve them. For I, Yudevavayo Elohim, am a jealous Elohim, punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but displaying grace to the thousandth generation of those who love me and obey my mitzvot. Now, mitzvot are actually commandments. So he's then saying that there will be no carved images and that they will not bow themselves down before them. But now the pure in heart are also going to run in people who are not that pure in heart. And then he says that how blessed are those who make peace, for they will be called sons of God. Now, those who are truly pure in heart and therefore are living righteous lives, they will be able to sit down with those who are not living righteous lives, and they will be able to make peace with them. Now, peace means that they will sit down with them, that they will allow them to speak, and that they will allow them to speak their full opinion up to the point where they actually prove that they are wrong, that the guy who is truly seeking God fully is wrong. And then the guy who then was wrong will actually be in a position where he will then allow the righteous person to explain to him what he says. And that means that they can then come out of the situation fully understanding each other's points of view, but then also knowing that as far as the scriptures are concerned, it is only God's point of view that has any value at all. And therefore they will stay in fellowship with each other and not call each other heretics, because they will trust God that he will bring them into peace with each other. So they cannot vaguely make carved images, and they will also help others to get away from the carved images that we have just spoken about. Now, so these are the first two commandments. I am the Lord your God, who led you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and you are to have no other gods before you, and you are to make no carved images of any kind of representation of anything in heaven above you, not to bow down before them. Now, so those are the first two commandments.
Just something I struggled with. You shall not make a carved image of anything in the heavens or on the earth, and you shall not bow before it. Are those two things now tied together? In other words, I can make a sculpture of a horse as long as I don't bow in front of it or before it? Or does it actually say we are not supposed to make any sculptures of anything, not even angels? And obviously not of the sun and the moon, because they're in the heavens.
Okay, I'm going to answer you in an oblique way, but you'll understand why I'm answering you this way. There are two major thought patterns that apply in the world today. The one is the Greek world pattern and way of thinking, and the other one is the Hebrew way of thinking. And to the Greeks, the creation is perfect as it is, and they therefore worship the form of animals, and they worship nature, and therefore the naked form of man also is something that they give tremendous attention to. And you will know from where our culture comes from, how much the imagery, particularly in Italy, is of naked people, but also obviously in Greece. So it means that way of thinking says that everything that is created perfect. The Hebrew way of thinking says that everything that is created belongs to God, and that what we as human beings are here to do is that we are to become the conduits through which the Lord does that thing that is written in the Our Father: your will be done in heaven as it is on earth. So because we live in the heavenly dimension under control of the Spirit, it means that where we exist in the earthly dimension, we will bring it into the earthly dimension. So it means that the outward form is not what is important. It is the inward content that needs attention. And I think that this is what this commandment deals with. It deals with the fact that we are not to worship the outward form of anything, because God has no shape or form that we will serve him, but that we are to worship him as content. And therefore these things that he is saying here. And I doubt severely whether he was saying that there should be nothing beautiful that is made, because the things that were in the temple and the things that were in the tabernacle were all considered to be absolutely beautiful, and they were actually images of what is in heaven, because Moses saw what was in heaven and had it done on earth.
Yeah, there were also pomegranates on the hems of the cloth.
Yes.
Which is again an image of something that was created, but he ordered it.
Yeah.
Which I think gives it a completely different
yes
stand in the scope of things. Okay.
Yes, but it also has another implication, and that means that we are not to worship the form. Therefore, when we start looking at naked forms and at very muscular horses, then we have to start questioning whether making images of them cannot lead to worship of those images, and therefore we need to be careful about it. The same applies to making statues of men. It is something that one sort of wonders whether this should happen and whether we should have these statues all over. So then when Yeshua makes the next statement, he is starting to speak into the next of the commandments, the next of the words. How blessed are those who are persecuted, for they pursue righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. How blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and tell all kinds of vicious lies about you because you follow me. Rejoice, be glad, because your reward in heaven is great. They persecuted the prophets before you in the same way. Why is he using the prophets here as the reason for persecution? He's using the prophets because the prophets were persecuted, because a prophet by definition will live in righteousness, and because only a righteous person can really be a true prophet. If you compare to what Yeshua says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will be saved, but those who do the will of my Father in heaven. And then many will say to him, but we drove out demons and we did mighty deeds in your name. And he will say to them, I did not know you, go away from me, you unrighteous people. So what that actually means is that if the fruit of one's life is not in accordance with what the scriptures are saying, he will chase those people away from me. And this is why he's mentioning the prophets here, because the prophets were righteous, and therefore when you are persecuted because what you are bringing to people actually is scripture and is from God himself, and people are then persecuting you for that reason, then you will be blessed. So the parallel to this is, that in the book of Isaiah, the Lord speaks quite a bit about using his name, profaning his name, and profaning his name, he actually identifies quite accurately there by saying that they profaned his name by saying things that he had not said, by dreaming things that he had not made them dream. And therefore, that just by misrepresenting him, they are using his name lightly. So this then is the parallel of this commandment. You're not to use lightly the name of Yudevaveh your Elohim, because Yudevaveh will not leave unpunished someone who uses his name lightly. You are the salt for the land, but if salt becomes tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except being thrown out for the people to trample on. You are the light for the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Likewise, when people light a lamp, they don't cover it with a bowl, but put it on a lampstand so that it shines for everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before the people so that they may see the good things you do and praise your Father in heaven. There are a couple of things that are attached to the Sabbath. The first thing is that it is a day for family and for members of the faith, and to associate with them and to be in fellowship with them. The second is that it is meant for study of the scriptures. And the third is that on that day, salt and light gets a totally new meaning, because salt is put onto the bread. It is part of the salt of the covenant, because the salt preserves and it gives taste. And this means that the message that we have, that we receive from the Lord when we spend time with Him, actually becomes salt when other people see it in our lives. And he says that when it is functional, it causes an improvement of taste and it preserves. But when it is no longer good, it is considered that is when it lands on metal and causes rust. And that tastes terrible, and there's no use for that at all, excepting to throw it out. And then he says, you are light for the world. So the light for the world we become when we start showing the world the light that he has put into us. So we are to be these two things. We are to become a salt, which is to become tasty and to preserve, and on the other hand, to become a light. Now, the center of this is that there are two things here again. There's salt and there's light. And the two actually also represent God and man. Two, man and wife. They're two. Yeshua and the Father, they are two, bound together by the power of the Spirit. God and man bound together by the power of the Spirit. And this is a part of this and is inherent to this whole imagery that comes out of the Sabbath. So being salt and light, it actually means that we are to become people of Shabbat, but we are to be people of Shabbat in everyday life. So we are to be salt and light to the nations and to everyone under all circumstances, when it is good and when it is bad. And this is parallel to this commandment: remember the day Shabbat, to set it apart for Elohim. You have 6 days to labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Shabbat for Yudei Vava your Elohim. On it you are not to do any kind of work, not you nor your son or your daughter, nor your male or female slave, not your livestock, not the foreigner staying with you inside the gates to your property. For in 6 days Yudei Vavhe made heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them, but on the seventh day he rested. This is why Yudei Vavhe blessed the day Shabbat and separated it for himself. And then later on he comes and he tells us that man was not created for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. So it means that he then goes ahead and he does specific things on the Sabbath. And doing these things on the Sabbath, he's not breaking the Sabbath, he's keeping the Sabbath. So the disciples pick kernels of grain, and the Pharisees complain. And then he cites David ate the bread of the presence, and the priests who work on the Sabbath, who are both doing what actually, strictly speaking, is forbidden by the commandment, you may not work. But by saying that, he was saying, you're hypocrites, because you have in your houses, you have food, and you can just walk to your kitchen, pick up food and eat it. These people have no houses of their own. Now they get grain here, and they pick the grain and they actually rub it out so that they can eat it. And now you say that's work, you hypocrites. And then he says that what the Lord wants is compassion rather than sacrifice. Sacrifice is brought mainly to deal with sin, or actually totally to deal with sin. So he's actually saying that compassion, which is an outflow of righteousness, and really taking care of people, loving people, is much more important than dealing with your sin and unrighteousness. So just be righteous. Don't come and bring sacrifices. That doesn't help. bring compassion. And then he says he's the master of the Sabbath, so he has the right to determine what can and cannot be done on the Sabbath. And then he says the Sabbath is made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And he starts doing some things. He heals the shriveled hand of a man. Now, a man with a shriveled hand cannot do what he needs to do to truly keep the commandments. And then when he heals them, they're angry with him, and he feels a mixture of anger and sadness. And the reason for the anger is because they don't understand that the Sabbath is made for man and not man to serve the Sabbath. And therefore he is angry with them. And at the same time he is sad because those people should understand that the Sabbath is there for man, and that it is a day for compassion, and that it is a day to take care. It is a day of healing. It is a day of fellowship. It is for other people. So you can actually see also why he says that this has to spill over onto every day of the week, because every day of the week is to be a Sabbath to you. And then he cites the whole thing of, if an animal falls into a pit, you will surely get it out. Or if your son falls into a pit, you will get it out. And then he says, and you circumcise on the Sabbath, because when the 8th day comes around, you circumcise. And by saying that, he's actually saying that on the Sabbath you circumcise because it is a form of healing. It cuts away sin, because the foreskin is an image of sin, because Paul also writes that Yeshua is our circumcision, and he's actually cut away from humankind so that sin can be removed from humankind, because he took all sin of all times on himself, and not because he was sin himself. So the circumcision actually puts a Jewish boy in a position where he should be able to live in the eternal world of God, in the presence of God, and inhabit eternity whilst he lives on earth, and therefore that he makes what is that in the vicinity where he is, he brings heaven to earth through the way that he lives, not because he's earning anything, but because God does it through the power of his Spirit that is working through him. Then the next time he heals on the Sabbath, he does it at the sheep gate. Now that immediately brings an image from he is now with his flock. He's at the place where this Israel should be his flock. He's now speaking to his flock. And there's a place by the sheep gate by the name of Beit Chesed, Bethesda. And Beit Chesed means the house of loving kindness. And there are 5 colonnades there, and 5 colonnades say grace. So at the house of grace and loving kindness, which is at the sheep gate, the water is stirred once a day, and there was a man there who had been lame for 38 years. So practically speaking, his whole life, and there was no help to help him to enter the water. And there was no grace at the house of grace, because they would just walk past with their noses in the air and not help this guy to get in. So people who were less seriously ill would be able to get into the water, but this man lay there for many, many years, until Yeshua looked at him and said to him, "Take up your bed and walk." And immediately the Pharisees were up in arms, saying he's now working on the Sabbath because he's carrying his bed. But the beds at that stage were, practically speaking, they were just reed mats. So he rolled up his bed and he was walking with it. Now, for crying in a bucket, how is he truly breaking the Sabbath? He isn't there. Did he really have to wait until the sun set before he could go home and take his bed with him? Was he supposed to leave his bed there, go home and come and fetch it after the sunset? Then Yeshua says that I don't do these things on my own, but I do what I see the Father do. And then they start saying, but you are saying that you're equal to Elohim, that you're a son of Elohim, and therefore that you're equal with Elohim. And he actually then takes out a scripture that if they knew exactly what he was alluding to, he was alluding to a psalm that says that those who do the laws are Elohim. And that is, it actually is saying those who do the laws are God, because the laws are God. God is the law. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. So that when people are doing what they should be doing, living in righteousness and sinlessness, which, by the way, is not possible for any person to do, but is only possible through the work of the Spirit, then that person actually is a son of Elohim. And if you look at Romans, he says that we are co-heirs with Messiah. So we inherit with him. And if we inherit with the Messiah, we are the brothers and sisters of the Messiah. And therefore, this also applies to us. Then he finds the blind man, and he takes dust and he mixes it with spit and he makes mud. So he makes daga on the Sabbath. And obviously this is work. And then he puts this mud onto the man's eye and he sees. And the Pharisees say he's working on the Sabbath. And then they ask the man, who is this Yeshua? Who is this man who helped you? And he says, I don't know. He's gone. And then he says, but he is the prophet. And when he says he is the prophet, he's actually saying he is the Messiah, because the prophet, like Moses, that they had to listen to, one of the signs was that he would heal the blind, that he would heal the lame, that he would heal the lepers, that he would resurrect someone from the dead who had been dead for at least 3 days. Because all of this is written in different portions in Scripture, and these are all things that the Messiah would do. And then the Pharisees go and they try a dirty trick, and they go and ask the parents, and they say, "What is this? Was he blind?" So they say, "Yes, he's blind, but we don't want to get involved in this whole story." Then they go to him and they say, "Can you see?" And then he says, well, and he actually implies that this is the Messiah because I can see, because the Messiah will heal someone who is born blind. The fifth word, and there's still two other things that he also does. He heals a woman that is doubled over, and that actually means that she is doubled over by the burdens of this world. And he says that his burden is light and his yoke is soft. So he actually gets her to walk up straight because he takes her burden away. And then he also heals someone who has water, and that is either kidney failure or heart failure or lung failure that causes water. That is what he has to say about keeping the Sabbath. On the surface, it seems as though he's rewriting the entire commandment, but he's not. He's actually telling them that from the beginning, this was the meaning of the commandment. This is what I wanted you to do. Don't do your own work for income. What you must do is you must do the works that were prepared by God for you. Therefore, you must do what God says you must do, and that will bring you income. So you're not working to get money, you're working to please God. The fifth word. Now, just see that now he goes and he actually turns the commandments around. And he actually says, if you want your children if you want your children to honor you, what do you have to do? And he says, don't think that I've come to abolish the Torah or the prophets. I've not come. I have come not to abolish, but to complete, to give full meaning. Yes, indeed, I tell you that until heaven and earth pass away, not so much as a yud or a stroke will pass from the Torah, not until everything that must happen has happened. So whoever disobeys the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys them and so teaches will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness is far greater than that of the Torah teachers and Plushim, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And he's starting to allude to quite a number of things here. The first thing is that he says that the law doesn't change. And then he says that nothing will go away of everything. And then he says, so if you disobey the least of these commandments and teach others to do so, you will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. So he says the way to teach is you must obey and teach. Because when you obey, you actually show people how to keep the commandments. So when we listen to the voice of the Spirit in us, we are obeying the Spirit, the law of the Spirit who is in us, and that we are to teach this so that the people who learn from us will see how to do this. And then he says, not even the least of the commandments. You must keep even the least of the commandments, and the least of the commandments is considered to be this, that if a small bird falls out of the nest, you will put it back. So you can see how minute it is, that he's actually saying the small detail, and the keeping of the small detail is important. But obviously, there's a second thing that goes along with this, and that he says, I tell you that unless your righteousness is far greater than that of the Torah teachers and Prishim, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And these people, if you go and examine the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, the modern day rabbis and the modern day Jews, they live exemplary lives. Their mothers and fathers can be proud of them, the way that they keep the commandments. But they are not doing this under control of the Spirit. So God says that your righteousness, you cannot be righteous if it is not the Spirit that builds the righteousness into you, because you would be a legalist otherwise. And then he says, teach the children the jots and strokes of the law. For that reason, the least of the commandments, as the Spirit speaks to you, and we will allude to that a little bit too. Then he says, so the parallel to this is honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land which Yudevave, your Elohim, is giving you. So there is this whole thing to it. Now there are four things that are written in the texts that are bound to the forehead and to the arm. And here they are. The first is the confession of faith. Shema Yisrael, Yudevave Eloheinu, Yudevave Echad. Hear, O Israel, Yudevave our Elohim, Yudevave is one. So he's saying, I'm indivisible. But hear, O Israel. It doesn't say it is written, O Israel. He says, hear, O Israel. So he's saying, when I communicate with you, you must hear that I am one. And you are to love Yudevave, your Elohim, with all your heart, all your being, and all your resources. So if you're to love him with all your heart, it means that the Spirit is going to write it on your heart. And that's implied already long before Jeremiah and Isaiah. And these words which I am ordering you today are to be on your heart, and you're to teach them carefully to your children. So they're not to be laws, they are to be love in you. And you are to talk about them when you sit at home, when you're traveling on the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. So under all circumstances, you are to do what the Spirit tells you, and you are to teach your children what the Spirit is saying to you, so that they will know what you are adhering to and what you are doing, because it's not about keeping the laws, it's about hearing the word of the Spirit. If you walk, these are the laws for walking. If you sit, these are the laws for sitting. These are the laws for lying down, and these are the laws for getting up. And then he says, tie them to your hand as a sign. Put them at the front of your headband around your forehead, and write them on the door frames of your house and on your gates. The interesting thing is there are only 4 texts, the 4 portions in which this is written. To tie it on your hand, to put it on the front of the headband, and to write it on your door frame. It's actually written in only 2 places. And that has everything to do with just put down reminders for yourself that you will always remember to do this, that you will always remember to listen to the Spirit. So if you listen carefully to my command, which I am giving to you today, if you are to listen carefully. So this is not about doing what the laws are. It is listening to God and doing what He is saying. Then you will be doing the laws anyhow, because anyone who is living controlled by the Spirit cannot break the law. To love Yudevave your Elohim and serve Him with all your heart and all your being, then I will give your land its rain at the right seasons, including the early fall rains and the late spring rains, so that you can gather in your wheat, new wine, and olive oil, and I will give your fields grass for your livestock, with the result that you will eat and be satisfied. But be careful not to let yourselves be seduced, so that you turn aside, serving other Elohims and worshipping them. So he's saying, this is what I command you to do. You must adhere to this. You must adhere to what the Spirit is saying to you, and you must not serve other gods. So the minute you start hearing other voices, you are starting to serve other gods. And then he says what he's going to do. If you do, the anger of Yudevave will blaze up against you. He will shut up the sky so that there will be no rain. The ground will not yield its produce, and you will quickly pass away from the good land Yudevave is giving you. So he says, I'll banish you from the land. Therefore, you to store up these words of mine in your heart, in all your being. Tie them on your hand as a sign. Put them at the front of the headband around your forehead. Teach them carefully to your children, talking about them when you sit at home, when you're traveling on the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. And write them on the door frames of your house and on your gates, so that you and your children will live long on the land Yudevave swore to your ancestors that He would give them, as long as there is sky above the earth. Now, the third text that is written in these little boxes, the one on the forehead actually, Yudevave said to Moshe, set aside for me all the firstborn. Why the firstborn? Because the firstborn were saved in Egypt, and the firstborn are also the spiritual leaders of a father's household when the father passes on. So whatever is first from the womb amongst the people of Israel, both of humans and of animals, belongs to me. Moshe said to the people, remember this day on which you left Egypt, the abode of slavery, because Yudevave, by the strength of his hand, has brought you out of this place. Do not eat chametz, the unleavened bread. You are leaving today in the month of Aviv. Do not do sin, because when Paul and Yeshua start speaking about leaven, they start speaking about sin. And then he says, you are to celebrate the Passover. So he says that in your remembrance and in your teaching of the children, you are to remember the Exodus from Egypt. In other words, you are to remember the cross of Calvary, because the cross of Calvary is what made the Exodus from Egypt possible. That we can discuss that at a later stage, because it's true. When Yudevave brings you into the land of the Canaani, Hittite, Emori, Hivi, and Yevusi, which He swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this ceremony in this month, the Passover. For 7 days you are to eat unleavened bread, and the seventh day is to be a festival for Yudevave. Matzah is to be eaten throughout the 7 days. Neither chametz nor leavening agents are to be seen with you throughout your territory. So he says, get rid of your sin. And in terms of the exodus of Egypt and the cross of Calvary, don't do sin. But you will never be able to do that on your own. You will only be able to do that when I come over you and I am the Spirit who is living in you. On that day, you are to tell your son, it is because of what Yudevave did for me when I left Egypt. Moreover, I will serve you. It will serve you as a sign on your hand, as a reminder between your eyes, so that Yudevave's Torah may be on your lips, because with a strong hand, Yudevave brought you out of Egypt. Therefore, you are to observe this regulation at its proper time, year after year. So there is this commandment to remember the cross and to remember the exodus from Egypt, because the exodus from Egypt is just actually happens in terms of the sign of the cross. And then it's to be a sign on your hand, a reminder between your eyes, because the firstborn are to teach this. When you fall away, your firstborn are to see to it that this happens. When at some future time your son asks you, what is this? Then say to him, with a strong hand Yudevave brought us out of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. With a strong hand he led us out of our sin. When Satan was unwilling to let us go, Yudevave killed all the firstborn males in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of humans and the firstborn of animals. This is why I sacrifice to Yudevave any male that is born from the womb of an animal, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. So I keep the firstborn of my sons, but nevertheless they are to serve Yudevave, so they are to see to it that the gospel continues in this house. This will serve as a sign on your hand and at the front of a headband around your forehead, that with a strong hand Yudevave brought us out of Egypt. So repetitively he's saying this because it has to be done. And you will also have noticed that he says that the firstborn of a donkey, you are to break its neck. Now, there's an interesting thing. Because of Ishmael and also of Esau, it is said that they were wild donkeys. And their wildness was because they were not serving God as their father Abram and Jacob were, or Israel were. And therefore they were wild donkeys. And then it becomes interesting to say that you must break its neck, because it certainly is not saying that you must kill your son, but it says that you must remove him as head of your family if he is a wild donkey, and then one of your other sons must come and serve in his place to see to him that see to it that he will do what you want. So this is to serve as a sign on your hand and at the front of the headband around your forehead. So you see, God is actually telling the Jews, you are to inscribe all of this way of life. You are to inscribe it on your children so that they adhere to it. You have heard that our fathers were told, do not murder, and that anyone who commits murder will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who nurses anger against his brother will be subject to judgment. That whoever calls his brother you good for nothing will be brought before the Sanhedrin. And whoever says fool incurs the penalty of burning in the fire of Gehenna, of purgatory or of hell. So if you are offering your gift at the temple altar and you remember there that your brother has something against you, leave your gift where it is by the altar, then go make peace with your brother, then come back and offer your gift. So what is this actually saying? Is that when you are nursing anger against your brother, you start ignoring him. So ignoring your brother already is murder. gossip or talking badly is murdering your brother, because in the first instance, when you ignore him, you're cutting him out of your life. When you're gossiping him, you're causing other people to cut him out of their life. And when you despise him, you're cutting him off from communication with all people. And this is murder, is to take people out of communication with people. And God does not take it lightly at all. So he says, do not murder. And then he says that this strange thing, when you're offering your guilt at the altar, and remember that your brother has anything against you. So if your brother has anything against you, what is this actually saying? This is actually saying that your brother is nursing anger against you. So if you see that your brother is ignoring you, then you are to go to your brother and sort that out, so that if there is something that you have sinned against him, that you have not rectified, that you will rectify that before you come and make a sacrifice. Because it is a principle of Scripture that we are to confess our sins to the people against whom we have sinned. You have heard that our fathers were told, do not commit adultery, but I tell you that a man who even looks at a woman with the purpose of lusting after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye makes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Better that you should lose one part of you than to have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand makes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Better that you should lose one part of you than have the whole body thrown into Gehenna. He's saying that if you look, and if you see that a woman is beautiful, or you lust after a woman, or she has a lot of money, or with her comes a lot of power, or whatever else comes along with a woman, if that is the reason why you want to deal with that woman, you've already set yourself up for a divorce. Because we are not to associate with a woman because of all of this stuff, but we are to associate with a woman because of who she is. And we are to create a relationship with her. If all these other stuff become important, when these other things fall away, we won't be interested in her anymore. We won't have a relationship with her anymore, and we will be committing adultery. We will be walking away from her. And then he says, if your eye makes you sin, in other words, if you look and see, and that is wrong, in other words, you are lusting after her, or you are seeing that she is beautiful, or seeing that there's a lot of money, or seeing all sorts of things, then he says, don't go there. Change your way of looking, because to gouge out your eye is also sin. Therefore, he's saying, change your way of looking, and you will have a new eye. Change your way of doing, and you will have a new hand, and then you will not need to throw it away. So he's saying, don't look to desire, remove the eye, look differently, cut your hand off, and change your behavior. So this all takes place in the sense of do not commit adultery. The eighth word. So if you're offering your gift at the temple altar and you remember there that your brother has something against you, leave your gift where it is by the altar and go, make peace with your brother, then come back and offer your gift. If someone sues you, come to terms with him quickly, while you and he are on your way to the court, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer of the court, and you may be thrown into jail. Yes, indeed, I tell you, you will certainly not get out until you have paid the last penny. So this whole portion has everything to do with owing money. It has to do with guilt. So if you find that your brother has something against you, maybe you borrowed something from him, maybe you've taken something from him, maybe, and you need to go and find this out. And then he's saying that leave it there and go and fix that up first, so that if someone sues you, in other words, you owe him money. Sort this out before it becomes bigger. And he's actually saying that if you make debt, sort this out with the person when you make the debt. Tell him how you're going to repay it. Tell him if you cannot repay. And if you cannot repay, it is fine. Then if it is something that is essential and he can afford it, what the scriptures actually are saying to him is that he should be doing what the scriptures say, and that is that he should be giving you what you need, and that the Father in heaven will be rewarding him. So, but this is not an excuse to just go and take and take and take from a brother. It actually says that we are to be there to support and to help each other. So he says we have to rectify matters. We have to pay debt or arrange payments. And then also we must know that it is theft not to pay a guy who has worked. Whether he's worked for a day, a week, or a month, he needs to be paid before you take anything for yourself. And then the second thing that he says is he says that if you pick up something in the street, you find something, you need to find its true owner. Even if it's 30 years later, you need to give it back to the true owner. Otherwise, you have stolen. If you have borrowed and you haven't given back, you have stolen. And then the parallel to all of this is you may not steal. The ninth word, again, you have heard that the fathers were told, do not break your oath, keep your vows to Yudevave. But I tell you not to swear at all, not by heaven because it is God's throne, not by the earth because it is his footstool, not by Jerusalem, because it's the city of the great king. And don't swear by your head because you can't make a single hair white or black. Just let your yes be simple yes and your no a simple no. Anything more than that has its origin in evil. Now, he's actually alluding to the fact that we have these different ways of saying that what I'm telling to you now, I really will do, and then we say it in a different way than when we just say, I'm going to do this. And what he's saying is he's saying you shouldn't do this. Don't swear by the earth or by Jerusalem or by by the heaven. Just don't do that. Just do what you say, and don't create any intrigue in the process. So your yes must be yes, and your no must be no. And the parallel to this is do not give false evidence against your neighbor. The 10th word, if your right eye makes you sin, gouge it out and throw it away. Better than you should lose one part of you than have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand makes you sin, cut it off and throw it away. Better that you should lose one part of you than have your whole body thrown into Gehenna. Now again, this is about looking and coveting. Because if you look at a woman to desire her, you are coveting. And he's actually saying that if you are coveting, get rid of the way that you're looking. Because if you're coveting, you're going to end up in adultery. And if you're coveting, you're going to end up stealing. And if you're coveting, you're going to end up breaking your promises and not doing what is true. So he says, just get rid of this way of doing, and then you will not covet in any, don't look to desire. Remove your eye and be satisfied with what the Lord has given you. And the parallel, do not cover your neighbor's house, do not cover your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So when Yeshua is speaking in Matthew 5, he's actually speaking about the 10 Commandments, and he's showing us how we should be keeping the 10 Commandments, not the commandments of the law, but now the commandments of the Spirit, which are totally different.